Hello, everyone. Today, I'm very happy to have with us a professor, a fellow economist, and a professor. Good to have them on this show sometimes. Right now, we have with us Namesh Killemsetty. He's a professor at OP Jindal University in Haryana, Sonipat. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Namesh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathur. It's such an honor to be invited to your Vidpeds. I remember going through these videos of a few students of mine who were lucky enough to be invited by you. And I always thought I wish I was young enough to be invited in these sessions and had the opportunity. And I guess your decision of inviting more senior people came in right at the right time for me to get a chance. So I'm really grateful, and this is such a happy feeling to me for me to be a part of this. Just a small correction. Unfortunately, I'm not an economist. I am a public policy scholar. So, so this is something I mean, to the extent that I've always had a rift with economists because of because of the fact that they have kind of laid such a major emphasis, or like they have such a major hand in how policy making is done in India. So I've always been kind of angry at them, and I thought like this is maybe my way of bringing that change in India as such. So
Hang
I
on.
actually,
I'm
yeah,
sorry I said
no,
economist,
that's
but I will come back to you later on
yeah,
public policy
yeah,
because I am also moving quite a bit away.
mhm,
I won't say away, would say I'm expanding from
yeah,
just economics to public
yeah,
policy,
yeah,
but I'll discuss that with you offline.
sure,
Go ahead.
sure, yeah, yeah. So I thought of just spending the next few minutes, maybe talking a little bit about my journey, and hopefully, if this gives some sense of, I don't know if I should call it motivation, but maybe some sense of direction for people who've kind of been thinking about in terms of taking a switch towards public policy as a career, specifically considering the fact that in the last few years, I mean, in the Indian context, public policy is being seen as the new buzzword and as one of the new careers in which many people are actually considering to kind of engage in full time. I was someone who decided to take a plunge over a decade ago. And having done that, it's been a learning lesson in many ways. And I think I'll be more than happy to kind of talk this through. Um, Whenever someone asks me to introduce myself, I always have this weird grin on my face. And they ask me, I mean, they say me, where are you from? I prepare myself for a long story that the other person might not even be interested for. So I was born and brought up in this small Himalayan state of Sikkim in the northeastern part of the country. And my parents were actually from the southern part. My dad's from Orissa, which is a state in the eastern part of the country, and my mom's from Andhra. And having grown up in Sikkim my entire childhood, I grew up in this environment where I conveniently used to speak four languages at the same time. I used to speak English, Hindi, Telugu, Nepali. And at the same time, when I was to visit my parents, especially my father's relatives in Orissa, I had to speak Oriya as well. So that way I grew up speaking five languages, which is something that came in kind of naturally to me, to the extent that even not even to that, and even it was such a interesting intermix of cultures as well, if you can think about it, uh, to the extent of having idlis for breakfast and momos for lunch. And then again, kind of like just having a mix of both of them for dinner for whatever was left. But then what that made me, growing up in that environment, I think not only helped me made respect towards all the cultures that existed, kind of also helped me adapt to new things, but also kind of made me strong enough, specifically for the fact that I grew up in this very small village in the eastern part of Sikkim. It's a town called Pakyong, which coincidentally has the only airport of the state, which opened a few years ago. Having grown up in this small school, like in this small village, having completed my schooling, which later on I did from the capital city of Gangtok. As everyone, I like after completing my high school, I was not even sure in terms of what I should be doing. And as I think all kids, all millennials at that point of time were supposed to do, you either go for engineering or you go for medical. I remember my father, being a high school biology teacher, forced me to kind of go for medical, being the only safe side. And I remember applying for all the medical examinations, and I was very sure that I did well as well. But then when I remember, I got my board examination results for class 12, and somehow I got 39 out of 100 when I was expecting above 90. So I took it as a test. I took it as a sign, maybe from the Almighty, that maybe I should do something different. Moved towards engineering and ended up moving all the way to Allahabad, where I did my undergraduate studies in civil engineering. And that is considering the fact that having done all of that, like at that point of time, my education in spoken Hindi was just at a school level of having studied till class 8 or so. So I was not very fluent in Hindi, but it was just that I could understand and speak a bit. From there, you move to a town like Allahabad, where even the communication. I remember the first day of my engineering class, and the professor comes and says, "Aapka Janpad Abhiyantriki mein swagat hai." And I had to spend a week trying to understand what Janpad Abhiyantriki was. So for the 4 years in itself was kind of a fun ride, I would say. Having completed my engineering, I worked for a year or so. And then I guess I realized that I think doing a post-graduation might be a good way of moving my career ahead. Um, the reason I think I'm saying all of this story is maybe I have realized over my time, and I think this is something that I'll emphasize again and again, that I've realized that destiny plays a big factor in terms of how your life gets shaped. So as I was saying, just because I got low marks in engineering, low marks in biology, I decided to go for engineering. During my entire 4 years, I think I hated engineering to say a certain extent, just because I had no other option. And as soon as I got into the field in my first job, I realized that the only way of succeeding is maybe going for a master's. I had started applying for colleges across the country. Of all the subjects that I fell in love with project management as a subject, and I thought that this is something maybe I should do a master's in. And at that point of time, I remember there's the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi, which I absolutely loved, and I thought that should be a great place for me to do my master's. I applied, I cracked through the written exam, and just before the day of my interviews, my mother met with an accident and she broke her leg, and that stopped me from kind of giving that exams. And I decided to go to a fallback option, which was it was an equally famous university, but not in my priority. Was this place called CEPT University in Ahmedabad. And I think going there was one of the best things that could have happened in my life, just because of the sheer interdisciplinarity in the way the university kind of worked and the pedagogies that they followed. Despite being while I got enrolled in this program of infrastructure management, that was where I was introduced to this idea of also looking at policy research while undertaking studies from a technical perspective. To the extent that in my final semester, I was lucky to get a scholarship from George Mason University to work on a project of one of the postdoctoral candidates, who later on turned to become my PhD advisor as well. And this was again a matter of destiny. I mean, this guy, while he was doing his postdoc in 2012, he was looking for someone in Ahmedabad who could do his field work. I signed up just because he was paying good money, US dollars, to a 22-year-old student. And I thought, why not? So I just signed up for it, did the work for 6 months. And one thing led to the other. And now it's been 16 years I've been working on exactly the same field. Um, so after I did my master's, the first job that I had was working for the Mumbai Metro. Um, the Mumbai Metro was just the first phase of the Mumbai Metro was just being constructed. And as a project manager, my primary responsibility was to kind of help in the construction of the stations and the alignments of the path as such. And while that was happening, I kind of got through, I had a chance of experiencing and observing what I researched in my dissertation for the first time. So this postdoctoral scholar that I was talking about, his research and his expertise was on slums. His entire research was primarily to understand the reasons why slums grow in a city and what is it that governments do as such to kind of ameliorate these challenges. And while working for the Mumbai Metro, I got to kind of experience the challenges that people living in slums face, and also for the fact that how large-scale infrastructure projects often become one of the biggest reasons for their resettlement as such. Um, 6 months of work doing that job, somehow my conscience kept on challenging me every day if I was doing the right thing, working not only for a multinational corporate, but also at the same time of having studied after having done all of those studies and then kind of doing the exact opposite of what I mentioned that this should be the right way. Luckily enough, again, my this is again destiny, I see. My dissertation was selected as one of the top three innovations in urban development by the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC. And I was actually invited to present my talk, to present my works of my dissertation at the UN General Assembly in 2013. This was way back in 2013. Um, Having got that as a once in a lifetime opportunity, I felt that if this is something that I could do from one dissertation of mine, then maybe this was again a signal that maybe I should move to a full-time career just doing this. And that was when I decided to take a permanent switch from engineering towards policy research as such. But then again, in 2014, there was not a lot of discussion or any kind of infrastructure or any kind of discussion around public policy in academia in India at all. I remember I applying through a couple of, I think at that time, only the top three IIMs, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and Calcutta, and even maybe TIS for that matter, had some public policy doctoral schools. I applied in the PhD programs across all the three, and and immediately getting rejected. Even I think one of the universities actually told me in the interview that an engineer will never understand what public policy making is, and maybe I should do an MBA instead. And at that point of time, I thought maybe just to survive, I ended up joining a small engineering college in Chhattisgarh, which again was the reason why I ended up taking academia as a full-time career, because that was when I was introduced to teaching as a profession. I so fell in love with the idea of how you as an individual can motivate the young minds up to an extent that it actually shapes their career and kind of makes them think the way you would kind of or ensure that it kind of helps them grow in their path of in their journey as well. So 2 years of doing that, and also at the same time preparing for my doctoral, for my PhD programs. Again, I think it was 2016. Finally, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship, moved to the US in Boston at University of Massachusetts. And the reason why I chose UMass was again just for that very person who was my advisor, who was the same person under whom I had received the scholarship in my master's. Um, and I think it was only because of him as my mentor, as my advisor, and now whom as I consider as one of my closest friends that I have, I was able to complete my PhD in the time that I thought I would, but also to the extent of having won a national award by the Urban Affairs Association, which is the largest like research body for urban studies globally. And that kind of motivated me to shape the rest of my career in urban studies as well. And since then, I've been working here at Jindal University. I think it's been almost 4 years. I remember you had an interaction with Naveen Thomas a few weeks ago. So Naveen and I are very close colleagues, and both of us together actually are the academic deans as such for the School of Government and Public Policy. Our work over here primarily entails running the programs at the school, and at the same time be the direct messenger as such for any problems that students might have. Alongside my administrative works, I still continue working on slums as my primary focus. As of now, I primarily study what are the I would say preferences. That's if I could use that term. Like, what are the preferences that slum dwellers have in this growing urbanization, and how does that vary across the cities as such? I mean, one major challenge that has always been seen is because of the top-down approach of how policy making has happened in India. A lot of these policies tend to always focus on metropolitan cities or larger cities because that's where you have the centers of power. And what usually happens because of that is the people living in the smaller towns or the non-metropolitan cities as such often get ignored, not only in the policy making process, but also in terms of identifying what their challenges are. And that's what my research has primarily been so far. I have been using, having worked in states like Orissa, in Andhra, in Gujarat, and now in Delhi as well. I have been my work primarily entails interacting directly with the slum dwellers, kind of kind of using my research as a way to highlight their voice, to understand what their challenges are across multiple dimensions, and based on that, make sense of how policy making can be made more participatory or be made more welcoming to their needs as such. You're on
Hang
mute,
on.
Dr.
Yeah,
Mark.
I'm
Yeah,
in. Well,
yeah,
thank you so much, Namesh. It's
yeah.
such an interesting journey, and I think you are hitting the high points of some key things that are overlooked in India,
Mhm.
and they need to be further looked at. And I will
Mm.
talk with you about them a little bit offline
Sure.
because I don't want this to become my show.
Yeah.
So tell us about some of the experiences that you mentioned, like Chhattisgarh. What was Chhattisgarh like? How do you contrast it with the other places that you have grown up in? And
Mhm.
sort of the personal angle is so fascinating, that
Mhm.
you have, I guess, multi, your mother and father aren't from the same towns and cities
Yeah.
and so on. So I think the personal side is also very fascinating. Let's get through that first.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something I always, I mean, my students can attest to it, that if given a chance, I speak hours
Let's listen.
um,
Let's listen.
instead of talking about the class.
Yeah.
Um, I think when you talked about
How
Chhattisgarh
how
as
come they
such,
got married?
it's I still
Do you know how your parents got married?
Oh yeah, I mean it's funny.
Yeah.
My father again. My father, he did his MSc in botany in way back in the 60s, and this was again in a small town in Orissa. I think sometime in early 70s, he decides to go to Sikkim just as a like just for excursion as such with a few friends of his, and that was when Sikkim was not even a part of India; it was an independent state.
Yeah.
Um, for someone who came from the coastal part of the country, from coastal Orissa, and having seen hills for the very first time, he so fell in love with this absolute beauty of the Himalayas that he comes back home and he decides to just move permanently to Sikkim, leave everything. So, I mean, his version of the story always, that this is something that he always tells us of. Once he moved there in 1972, it took him almost a year just living in hotels and going to the palace, Royal Palace, every day asking for a job. And it was only after a year that they actually gave him a job as a primary school teacher in one of the remotest places in West Sikkim. And it took him, he spent like 10 years or so over there. And it was sometime, I think, in the early 80s itself, that he was introduced to my mother's family, who were based out of northern Andhra. I mean, while they are from different states, technically the distance, it's just the, so my father, he lives in a town called, he comes from a town called Barhampur, which is in the southern part of Orissa. And
Yeah.
my mom is from northern Andhra Pradesh in the Srikakulam district. So
Yeah.
those two places are kind of connected to each other, but they have completely different cultures. So it was through a common relative that they were introduced to each other, and I have no idea if my mom ever was ready enough that she had signed up for this deal of moving to West Sikkim, which snowed for like 8 months a year, and that took for someone who grew up again from the coastal in Andhra Pradesh as such.
Yeah.
Uh, but then, yeah, I mean, like they spent 30 years of their lives in Sikkim itself, 35 years of their
Yeah.
life. It was only after retirement they moved back to Orissa at their hometowns. But I think this definitely played a huge impact in terms of how we grew up as well. Because as I remember again as kids in the small town that we did, our schools where we had only this one school in the entire village as such. And I think that was one big reason why implicitly why I think I kind of fell in love with being a teacher was
Yeah.
I remember even as a kid while going to the market to
Mm.
buy vegetables, and every person would know him as the teacher, like Namaste Master Ji. And I would feel like, oh, this is such a big sense of respect that you get being a teacher. And that is something I never had working as an engineer, even after my master's as such. So I think it was kind of bound to happen that maybe
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
destined to be a teacher for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Uh, but
But
yeah, I think,
can I just stop you for a
yes.
minute? People
Yeah.
say, Subodh, you were born to teach.
I guess.
I had stopped being a proper academic at some 12, 15 years later. I was on a
Uh,
plane,
yeah.
and the guy, I was talking to my fellow passenger. After some time, he says, "Are you a professor?" I said, "No." He says, "Then why do you talk like one?" Some of us are born to teach, I
Yeah,
think.
I guess it gets so deeply ingrained in your blood that it becomes so difficult to have a
Yeah,
separate identity.
right. So
No,
go
but I
ahead.
think no, but I think after a while, so one of my biggest
Mm,
reasons for validation of being a teacher was just a couple of years ago. I had one of the students whom I had taught during my days at Chhattisgarh. This girl, very sweet girl, she completed her undergrad and decides to prepare for her civil services, where she spends a few years there. And after having this discussion with her, after a few years, she gave a couple of attempts. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for her. And I have a feeling that it was maybe my presence in Jindal University that she decided to come back to do her master's where I was working. And she spent a couple of years there. And I felt that was the biggest validation that I could feel as a teacher, where a student
right.
decides to join a university just because of your presence as
Yeah.
such. I've still been in touch with many students that I have taught for over 12 years ago. In fact,
Yeah.
just today, I got a message from a student again who I had taught in Chhattisgarh, who just had a baby girl a few days
Mm,
ago, and it was so sweet that she just texted me
mm.
with her like with the photo of her kid and asked for her blessings, and I felt
Right, right.
that this is something that you can never like you can't ask anything for more than that.
No, I agree. Okay, wonderful. That's
Yeah.
but tell us about teaching in Chhattisgarh. What was it
Yes.
like?
Absolutely. I mean, again, teaching in Chhattisgarh was a different experience altogether. The only reason why I got through there was I was desperately looking for a job. I mean, having left a well-paying job at Mumbai Metro, to pursue a career in research is not something that you can easily convince your parents that is a thing to do. And while I knew ultimately that I wanted to go for a PhD, I wanted a backup job. Like I wanted a job where I could kind of earn some money and at the same time prepare for my GRE and other
Mm,
examinations as well.
mm, mm,
Thankfully, one of my friends knew someone who was a professor here at this university in Chhattisgarh. He had, and they had recently opened a department of civil engineering as well. And One thing led to the other. We had an interview, and while I believe that they might have obviously, I did not have bad credentials in my engineering days or my masters as well. But I think one of the big reasons why they chose me was because I studied in an English medium school and my communication skills were good enough, which was something they were struggling to find people with good communication schools,
mm,
with good communication
mm,
skills at that place.
mm,
And that 2.5 years was a life-changing experience. I mean, so
mm,
coincidentally, even the university in Chhattisgarh is called OP Jindal University. It's owned by the same person.
mm.
But just that the one in Chhattisgarh is primarily catering to engineering students.
Right.
And it's very local, as in, so more than half of the students actually come from tribal areas,
Mm,
especially around the Raigad belt where
mm,
the university is located, which has the main steel plant of the university.
mm,
So you have a lot of these kids who have I remember in my interactions who've never
mm,
even kind of
mm,
sat in a train or
mm,
have no idea of what the
mm,
world is outside the district they're in.
mm,
So the chance of interacting with them and telling them about the things that they could do and what all they could kind of pursue was
mm,
always a very motivational aspect to be so. And I think in that 2.5 years itself, and also because it was my first job as a teacher, as a, now in retrospect, I sometimes I feel that maybe I should not have been that friendly. What I ended up being, I remember every weekend I used to invite students to my room just so that they could cook chicken and we could have like a dinner together,
mm,
watching TV or something like that. Maybe
mm,
and I think that was one big reason why as well that students actually found comfortable interacting with me, because at the same time, I mean, at that point of time, majority of the students that I was dealing with were someone who was just 2 to 3 years younger than me. So there was not a
mm.
lot of age difference as such.
Right. Right.
And it was easy for them to kind of gel along with me as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that kind of bonding played a big reason in terms of making me kind of think through that I can be a good teacher. And I think after being in this field for almost 12 years, I think that I've done maybe a
Mm,
considerably good job as
mm,
such.
mm, mm. Okay, I have two questions.
Yes.
One, there are a lot of people who get a PhD abroad and then stay
Yes.
abroad, like me. And
Yes.
I want to know what made you go back to India. because people ask such questions. So I
Sure,
think
absolutely.
it's worth getting your personal perspective.
Sure,
Now, I don't
sure.
want a theory about it. I just want to hear your own reasons.
Absolutely. And I had two very strong reasons as such. One was personal and one was professional. And the professional also stemmed from a personal reason. Personally, I got married exactly 6 months before I went into the PhD program. And it was not like I gave that as a bad surprise to my wife that, hey, we got married and now I'm going to the US. But this was something that she knew from the very beginning. In fact, she played a major role in kind of pushing me to complete my PhD. So she herself was a PhD student at ISC Bangalore. So she kind of knew what goes along in kind of getting enrolled in a PhD and what are the challenges that I associate with it. And having seen my love for teaching, even she kind of made sure that I pushed myself to complete all the necessary process as such. So that was one thing. I mean, as soon as I got into the PhD program, I knew that I was working in a timeline because I wanted to complete everything and move back to be with my family, as simple as that. There was a time where we contemplated that she comes to Boston, and maybe we planned for a career together. But then it was the professional reason that stopped me. And I think the professional reason came from those interviews that I was telling you at those IMs, where people literally told me that I can't pursue a career in public policy because I was an engineer. And also for the fact that majority of policymaking in India was driven by economists as such, and still is for that matter. I felt someone like me, I wanted to bring that change in the Indian public policy, at least in the academia setting. And that was one big reason why the moment I felt that I was in a good stage of completing my PhD, my preferences was just making a list of all the universities in India that either had a public policy school or that had enough money where I know that would be able to kind of start a policy school in the near future. And Jindal was being one of the oldest policy schools in the country, had been there for a while. And it's funny that even when I joined Jindal, out of the 45 faculty members they had, there were only 3 people with a public policy background in the entire
Right,
school.
right.
Um, I mean, even now they have 7 or 8, but still it's a welcome change. But
Yeah.
I think that has been a big reason where to kind
Okay.
of encourage the students to think about policy making beyond the world of numbers and beyond the world of economics as such.
Okay. And I'm sure by now you have taught in so many places, or you have seen teaching in the US and you have
Yes.
seen Chhattisgarh and Jindal. Uh, what are the tips you have for young people? So they'll be very happy to, the viewers. I mean, one unexpected bonus from these Vidpeds is that many people see them just to hear what others have to say, which they couldn't
Yeah,
do without
absolutely.
the videos. You could
Absolutely.
only talk to your own seniors or your own
Mm,
college or your own
mm.
town. Now you can
Yeah.
hear anybody. So you are a successful professor. What are your tips?
Um, if I mean coming from my personal journey, I can narrow it down to 3 points, and I think this is something that I always encourage my students as well. One is believe in a good mentor. I mean, I think for me, what changed my life was being in touch with this mentor who was able to guide me in terms of navigating through the world of policymaking, and even to the extent of deciding what I need to do in my PhD and the career path to that. I mean, to the extent that every major life decision that I've taken, I make sure that I consult with him, and that has how I've moved ahead. And I think I've reached a stage where I try to emulate what he's done to me to the students around me.
Okay.
Because I believe that if I was able to change my life with his presence, maybe I would be able to do the same for students around me as well. So I think one major suggestion that I always give, if you're able to find an advisor or a professor, it could be a senior as well, whom you believe or whom you trust that can actually help you guide in the journey that you want to take in the career, just trust him or her. And maybe his suggestions or his or their life experiences can be the path for your own life as well.
Yeah.
The second suggestion that I could maybe say is, I guess sometimes failing is not that bad as well. Failing sometimes actually helps you introspect what have you been doing so far and what you should be doing next. It was just that, it was just the fact that because I was not that good an engineer, I realized that it kind of gave me the push that maybe I should think of doing alternatively. And it was just because of that I found my solace in research around policy making and specifically in urban studies for that matter. Even for the fact that even while teaching as well, one thing that I've always tried to do is teach as many new courses as possible. Because it is only then you realize up to what extent your limitations are, and from there you kind of go ahead. Um, Being an engineer, people always assume that I'll be very good with data and I'm very good with quantitative studies. I remember even with my PhD, even in my PhD applications, my entire proposal was very quantitative as such. It had very quantitative orientation. 1 year into my coursework, I so fell in love with this idea of talking to people and being on the ground that I became a qualitative researcher for the rest of my life. But that still didn't stop me. Even after coming here for the first 2 years, I was always told to teach statistics to students just because of my undergraduate background in engineering. So, but I took it as a challenge, and I think I still love teaching stats to the extent of being stereotyped as the stats guy over here. But still, that's the thing. I mean, if you do not like something, you get into it and then you realize what actually is the thing that you enjoy the most while you're hating what you're doing. And the third and the most important thing, and I think this is me being old enough or like having done in this, is it always works being structured in your approach. And by structured, what I mean to say is whenever you're working, it's always good to have a plan of breaking down your elements in terms of what you do. I mean, it was after years I realized that you actually have an entire frameworks in the world of, there's an entire world around it which is called as systems thinking. And I realized that this was what I've always been doing my life, is in terms of whenever you have any work that is in front of you, be it academic or so, it's always useful to break that task down into as simple elements as possible, right? And kind of micromanage, look at the smaller tasks one day at a time. And then not only that helps you understand why each small task is so important, but you also get a greater perspective in terms of why are you even doing that in the first way. So this has kind of worked for me, and I've always encouraged my students to do the same. And to the extent that I tell them that even when you're talking of making something as simple as a to-do list of what you want to do every day as soon as you wake up, that to-do list could also include something as as something basic as maybe watching 3 episodes of that series that I was planning to do while doing the literature review of the project that I was working on, and spending 45 minutes in the park just like staring at the sky. But having that list always helps you kind of do. And once you complete that task, just crossing that activity off from that checklist gives the sense of happiness that nothing else can.
Thank you so much. It is a very, very fascinating personal and professional journey. Hang on.
Yes.
Okay, so you have reached now, I think, stable trajectory.
Hopefully.
The twists and turns have finally led to a place from where I think the path is pretty straightforward, though one never knows where life takes you. But I think at the moment it looks like you are on a glide path, maybe going rapidly on the path, but it's there. So well done. I mean, in a sense,
thank you so
to know where you are and who you are is always a good thing at certain age. Till a certain age, I think we can all experiment and look to do various things. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And don't go away. I have lots to talk to you offline. Let's end it here today. Sure. I'll be back with a young person or an expert soon. Till then, bye, everybody.